And now, a board game review from me, Joe Sallen. You are watching the Sallen Coefficient, sponsored by Game Surplus, bringing the world of board games to you at GameSurplus.com. The Sallen Coefficient will help you to be able to understand my criticism of a game. I'm looking for things like variability, strategy, depth, choices, theme, storytelling, and innovation, and they're not all really equal to me. They're my preferences in relation to the things I don't like about a game, like time to learn, time to play, downtime, randomness. These are all things that can detract from an experience. The Sallen Coefficient is the overall relationship of the positive and the negative. So hopefully that will help you identify whether or not this game is worth your time. I'm Joe Sallen of The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly, a podcast about board games, also host of The Longview, and I'm here today to tell you about Near and Far. So Near and Far is an interesting type of game because it's somewhat unique in that it's trying to blend together a Euro resource management style game in which you've got a single worker taking a single action, getting resources, and then turning those resources into points somehow. And mixing together that with like a storybook game in which you're going to be reading encounters from an actual book of encounters. And so Near and Far does not come to us new from this designer as like a brand new idea. Like this is actually kind of like a sequel of sorts to the first game in the series called Above and Below. This is by designer Ryan Laukat. He also does all the artwork. The artwork for this game is fantastic. He's really is an artist and a designer. It's strange to see people have the talents in both of those categories and to do so well, so consistently. But I've played several of Ryan Laukat's other games. I can tell you straight up, I think this is the most beautiful of his games and the most cohesive artistic vision of any tabletop game that I can remember playing, aesthetically. Now, gameplay-wise, the way that this mixes together the Euro resource management together with the storybook encounters is by having you do all of the things that you would want to do to like build yourself up. Like think about a Euro game where you're like, I'm building up my house, I'm building up my city, it's Agricola, I'm building up my farmyard. Except here, it's like you're building up an adventuring party. So you're making your adventures, you're hiring adventurers, you're equipping them, you're paying for the pack animals, which in this game, for some reason, the birds are what they use. So it's not horses or donkeys. You actually will get birds to move you around and hold your stuff. And what you're going to be doing then is interacting with a town to bolster your party, to get better at adventuring. So that way when you go out on an adventure, which is done on a totally separate map, and it's actually, the game uses like a whole book of maps. There's like 11 different maps that you play on. When you go out on this map, you'll have the actual effectiveness of your party will be dictated by the adventurers that you've hired and other elements. So it's like you're kind of, whereas in other Euro games it's like I'm going to try to make my section of the city the best. This one is like you want your adventuring party to be the best, and it's also a race of sorts because every time that you make progress in this game, in most of the ways you can make progress, you're going to be putting out a camp. You start the game with 14 of these. Whoever places their 14th camp ends the game at the end of that round. And so you're racing to get these 14 camps out. However, just because you were the 14th, you were the person that ended the game, doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to win the game. But the game does move along at a very nice click because it is race to get that 14th one out. So in the past, my experience with this type of a system in Above and Below, which is pretty similar so far to what I've described, except instead of the map in Above and Below, you had like encounter cards. And so it would just have like a number. You know, everything looked like a dark image of a tunnel with a number on it, and then you looked in the book for that number, and then that was the encounter you had. Here, there's no longer a disconnect between the encounter that you're having and the location that it's actually taking place in. So when you actually look at the map, the physical map board, you're going to be able to see the places that your encounter is taking place. And that way when you pick up that book and read the encounter, it's a specific encounter that's tied to that map. So there's kind of a finite amount of ultimately encounters that you can have before you will run out of new material. And the way that this game handles that sort of new material, or how material is served up, is in two main forms. And that's either a character campaign or well, a character mode or campaign mode. I call them, for some reason, I call them both campaigns, but there's one that's the official campaign mode, which takes 11 sessions, maybe just 10. But anyway, like 10 or 11 sessions, so a long, much longer campaign, and you actually work through the physical locations on the map. And that's when you can like look at the map, see the encounter that you're having. The other way that you can play this game is character mode, and that's when you choose a character, and it doesn't matter where you're at on the map, your character has a certain progression that they will take. Based on some of the choices you make, you might actually get different quests, but your character's got a certain story, and you'll be playing through elements of that story. All the encounters in this game are very concise. They tend to be not super long, so the game doesn't get interrupted for too long whenever you stop, like, hey everybody, let's stop now, I need an encounter. Like, that can be kind of a little bit of an interruption, but here the encounters can be very, very short, just a couple of sentences sometimes. Sometimes you get longer ones, and they recommend, like that's even recommended in the book, that there's a couple that are longer stories, and so you're only supposed to play with the characters that have longer stories if you're playing like a 2-player game, because it'll be more reading and less time. So the entire production, though, shows a huge attention to your gaming time, to my gaming time. Knowing that like, even just the extra 2 or 3 paragraphs per encounter are best fit for a 2-player game shows that like there is, this game is made, not only is the game itself an efficiency puzzle, from a design perspective, this game was designed to be a very efficient use of your time. So actions that you can actually take in the town will be simple and quick, and you only take a single action on your turn. You're moving about the town. You always have to take a different action on a future turn than you did the turn before. And there's like 7 different places that you can go, and most of them have you either hiring adventurers or just getting stuff that you're going to use when you eventually go out on the road. And when you go out on the road, you want to have these like, make the adventure as efficient as possible. So you're collecting, like, the longer you can stay out is determined by how many hearts your party has. Then you can use those hearts whenever you have an encounter, when you need to roll a die for like some sort of an encounter event. You can actually spend those hearts if you roll poorly to increase your total. So you can go out and have adventures and know that like I can definitely beat this. And you usually have a choice whenever you have an adventure. You listen to a paragraph of text, and it's like you've got 2 things to choose from. Would you like to do this, which you need to get a skill of 7, or would you like to do this, where you need to get a combat of 6? And so you'll choose, and you'll then roll a die, add up all of your combat symbols or skill symbols, whichever one applies. Then you'll add hearts to make up the difference if you didn't get the number that you wanted. So that system means that you're always working with a resource that you can like manage. Even when you've got these die rolls, you're still able to manage what's going on with that resource and whether or not you're able to guarantee success. And so that's something I really enjoyed about Near and Far, is how much you're able to sort of plan, but then you want to make these actions efficient. However, the actual books of encounters themselves have a nice connection to the world and help to create a world. I'm never super compelled by the narratives, but I think that's partially because they're too short, and that's not a bad thing. It's just that like this is right now is, in my opinion, the best product to meld together the worlds of a Euro game with a storytelling adventure game. So if you ever played Tales of the Arabian Nights and you thought, this game seems like it's entertaining, but I don't feel like I have any control here. Every time I interact, it just seems like I could roll a die and see what happens. I see a hobo on the side of the road. What am I going to do? I'm going to give him $1 because that's really nice. So what's he going to do in return? Stab me. Or he's going to, actually, he was an undercover for some organization. He's going to kidnap me, and now I'm in jail. And everybody who's played Tales of the Arabian Nights knows how fun it is to be in jail, because it's always like the same paragraph that you're reading every time, the same interactions. You end up getting to the point where you memorize jail, because when you go to jail, it's always like kind of the same jail. Here in Near and Far, it doesn't feel like you've got these sort of pre-planned trajectories so much, where you'll keep playing the game and get stuck back in the same rut. Here, the game advances the narrative, and it does so through the campaign mode, through some really nifty storytelling tools, I guess. I don't know how else to say it. It's kind of weird because it's melding together that sort of idea of literature and a tabletop strategy game. But I find that even though the stories are not super compelling. The character campaigns can sometimes be like really basic, just like the idea that it's nice conceptually. I think that it does a great job of building the world, but telling a compelling story and world building at the same time. I don't know if there's a way that you could tell a compelling story if you had 300 words to tell a character's life story. How are you going to make that compelling and divide it into 13 different encounters that all have different options so that player choice actually becomes a part of it? I mean, you kind of have to sacrifice at some point a specific, either uplifting or heartbreaking narrative that you want a player to experience with player choice. If you want players to have a choice, then a lot of the times you need to think logically, like what would happen in that situation. So I know I've done a lot of explaining about this, but I think that even though the stories aren't super, super compelling, I think that they work within this system, and I can't imagine a better solution myself. I think they're fantastic. Overall, the Sallen Coefficient for near and far is an 8. And it's because it's an 8, which it's on a 10-point scale, and if you imagine a 10 is just perfect entertainment efficiency, meaning that this game is the deepest game that's the easiest to get into and the quickest to play. So kind of an impossible thing. Near and Far gets an 8, which is fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And it gets that because of how the elements of the game that make you like the Euro resource management is super well realized. At the same time, the world building is better here than I've seen it in any other tabletop experience, barring maybe a couple that I've ever played. And those games were weaker on the other elements, like actual gameplay elements, to make up for it. So it's just absolutely fantastic. The reason it's an 8 and not a 9 or even a 10 is because there are elements of the actions you can take when you're in the town that are kind of inconsistent. Some of the places in town never get used. Other places in town seem to be the place where everybody goes until finally the mine dries up and then nobody can go to the mine anymore. So there are some parts to the base game that kind of feel like I want them to be relevant, more relevant than they are. And to that end, there is an expansion, but this is the Sallen Coefficient of just the base game of Near and Far. It gets an 8. Actually, for me personally, my thoughts on Near and Far is that it is a 9. I could even see that going up to a 10 when I finish my actual full campaign, depending on how that story leaves me. I feel like the one thing that can push it is if that narrative is a little bit stronger than what I've seen. But like we're talking here between, something that's already among my favorite experiences in gaming. You're talking about just raising it up even higher. So that's my thoughts. I'm Joe Sallen. This has been the Sallen Coefficient for Near and Far, a fantastic game that mixes together building up an adventuring party and Eurogame elements together with a storytelling book of encounters. And if that sounds great to you and you like the sound of that, you should check out Near and Far. Thank you.